Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Boom Boom, released in 1936. It's the 125th of the series and it's directed by Jack King. You can find this on the Porky Pig 101 DVD set. As far as I'm aware, it hasn't been restored to HD quality yet, and it's in the public domain, so I'll have the short playing for you at the very end if you dare to watch it, because it is a Jack King short after all. Thankfully, it's a little bit better than the past few, and I will go through why in just a moment. But just for consistency's sake, I'll just let you know what happens in the short anyway, just so it matches up with all the other reviews. So we see various wartime scenes in what is presumably a take on World War I, with sentient bullets that happen to be around at the time for some weird reason. And after a while, we see Porky and Beans, who in the last third of the short, when the story actually kicks in, they need to rescue their general from the enemy. So there's not really much to it. As for trivia, not really much here, although this is the first proper Porky and Beans team-up done by Jack King. Yes, Porky had a minor cameo in Alpine Antics, and I think, once again, that was just done as a way to say, hey, we're going to sell you a DVD set called Porky 101, which sounds better than Porky 100. But whatever. Either way, this is the first time. Now, Tex Avery already did a short called Gold Diggers of 49, which I'd rather be watching, of course, but that teams up Porky and Beans as well. But here, it looks like Jack King must have gotten a mandate of some kind to include Porky, because audiences at the time would have been responding to Porky by now, whether it's from the first appearance in I Haven't Got a Hat, to the recent shorts released by Tex Avery. And you'll see not long after this, Beans would get phased out along with a lot of the other characters that introduced in I Haven't Got a Hat, and we get Porky as the Schlesinger Studio's first major starring character, who becomes incredibly popular until his own popularity is eclipsed by both Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny. Now, as I alluded to earlier, this one is actually a little bit better than the past few, although it is incredibly flawed, and once again, you guys can be the judge of that for yourself later on. It seems like Jack King has a better result with Beans when he's paired up with Porky, although Porky doesn't really have too much to do here. He is a sidekick character, but again, the character is unique compared to all the other cartoon characters of the time, in particular Beans, and there are a few scenes in here which just shows why Beans failed to take off as a character. And also, I will mention that this short was released in 1936, so for those who aren't aware, especially those younger ones who, I guess, haven't paid attention to history class, so this would have been a play on World War I. So World War II had not happened yet. That would be a few years after this one was released. And the big telltale sign of that is that you see one scene where you have the enemy with a German helmet that they would have worn during World War I. In fact, if it wasn't for that, this would have been just a generic war. And it's also interesting to see how they play up a war for laughs when we all know that a war ain't exactly fun. Just look at what's happening today, for example. But we'll take the short on its own merits. Obviously, it's just playing things up for laughs. Whether it succeeds or not is another question entirely. But we start off with the title being Boom Boom. And I gotta say, that's an interesting title because right away, literally, the short opens up with explosions. Boom boom, or many booms for that matter. So I'd assume we're somewhere in Europe, maybe north of France or something, I don't know. The cartoon doesn't tell us, but it doesn't really have to, so that's completely fine. In fact, the opening shots look pretty nice. I like the fact that you see all these bullets going around, there's a sense of danger in the air, you see an explosion in front of us, and we see some soldiers in silhouettes. So at least it looks nice, and I'd like to see this one properly restored. And I'll admit, this next scene also made me laugh. So you have the bugler who ends up getting shots while he's playing taps on the bugle, but it also shows the weakness that Jack King has as a director, at least around this time. He improves a little bit when he goes to Disney, but here, it just shows some of these gags, they do go on a little bit too long. And this bugle bit definitely should have been trimmed down a little bit, but it's a decent start. And then we see a ridiculous gag involving the enemy extending the cannon to a ridiculous degree, and someone happens to be in the cannon and just knocks out this soldier. It's an okay gag, I guess. I already have my suspicions as to who would have written most of these gags. I'll leave you guys guessing until I show you the evidence as to who would have written a lot of these gags, at least in my opinion, because there's no story credit for this one. And then we get to a gag that goes on for way too long, and that involves this horse just running along, maybe a relative of Horace Horsecollar, the horse character from the Disney shorts. So it's running around, and then we see, in a very weird gag, these bullets are pretty much alive. They're very sentient. The problem is the execution of these gags isn't particularly funny. It's more strange. There's just no oomph to them. So the bullet rips through this backpack, which seems to have not really have much in it, which is, again, very strange. And then the bullet ends up going in the helmet and just teeters around on the edge for a little bit. pushes it up, and then pushes through the helmet. Did I mention that it was a weird gag? Then it ends up turning into a skirt of some kind, trapping the horse's arms, and the gag continues. I mean, if the gag ended there, it would have been a strange gag, yes, but at least it would have been okay. But no, the gag keeps on going, with the horse going inside a bomb-damaged house, where the bullet still torments the horse, and ends up turning into a saw and saws that helmet off. Wow. Honestly, watching this gag, I think it was something that on the storyboards might have looked like it would have been a decent gag, but because it wasn't timed very well, this is something that should have been left on the cutting floor. But at least the gag ends pretty funny, I'll have to admit. So the horse sees the bottom part of the piano with all the hammer bits at the end, and so he plays Yankee Doodle and starts shooting along, and you think, okay, he's just gonna shoot against the enemy, but no. He ends up blowing himself up and becomes an angel, and still plays Yankee Doodle on the harp. I think the other problem with that gag, aside from the fact that, yeah, at least it ended pretty funny, when we're not seeing our main characters, why are we focusing on this horse character? We're already 2 minutes in and we haven't even seen Beans or Porky. And we see a few other gags that pretty much lead to nothing. So you see this weird looking cross-eyed character with buck teeth who ends up always hitting himself. What has he got, a toy gun or something? So he hits himself in the face. Now we're not interested in that anymore. Let's go and see this guy who's shooting a machine gun. He just walks away all shaken and there's no payoff. All right, we're back to that bucktooth guy who thinks, okay, I'm going to cover my face. Nah, that's not successful either. Ends up getting hit in the face. And again, no payoff. It just happens. So, all right, sure. And in the gag involving the hand grenades, yeah, there's a payoff. It just isn't funny. I mean, how dumb do you have to be to do this? But anyway, at this point, I'm going to point out what I do like is the look of a lot of these characters. And you'll notice that a lot of these character designs would just be recycled from all the old shorts and reused. And it makes sense. You want to keep your costs down. So why not just reuse generic characters? And this is definitely a dog you would have seen before, which would have been used in some background characters in either a Buddy short or a Beans short. And this sort of character design would end up being phased out once Tex Avery, Frank Tash, and Bob Clamp start their directing careers in earnest. But instead of dying, that dog character ends up just getting flung in the air, and an ambulance driver who happens to be driving there just catches him in a net and just chucks him in the back, presumably injuring him further. So there's that. Again, nothing much there. Oh look, we finally see Porky. And for those who aren't aware, in this short voiced by Joe Doherty, who had a real-life stutter, and that was the main reason why they ended up replacing him with Mel Blanc, because Mel Blanc could control his stutter, whereas Joe Doherty couldn't, so it will take a while to record his dialogue. That's why you'll find shorts like this, he doesn't actually speak that much. Also interesting that in the short Plain Dippy, Porky ends up joining the army, and here he is actually in the army. So, I mean, there's no continuity to these things, of course, it's just an interesting little coincidence there. But Porky blows the whistle, leading the charge. So at least in this one, he's actually comes across as quite brave, because the other characters who, again, those character designs you've seen in other Looney Tunes and Merry Melody shorts around this time, but Porky continues up, initially brave, but once he realizes that he's got no cover behind him, well, he just goes back and ends up cowering in the bunker. Oh look, we actually see Beans. So we're halfway and we finally see the main character that's supposedly the next big thing for Warner Brothers. I'm not sure what they were thinking. I mean, if you're going to promote Beans as a main character, whether he's a great character or not, you'd think they would have put a lot more focus on him, but no, he just appears halfway here. And if you look on the bottom left corner, we see Hardaway. So that would likely be a play on Ben Hardaway. And yes, I believe that he wrote a lot of the gags in the short, which would explain a lot, because this is the sort of thing he would do, just jokes with no real payoff or meaning, unlike what Tex Avery would do. And of course, we look in the background here, don't spit on the floor, fair enough. Vermin Villa. I'm not sure what that Vermin Villa is supposed to be referencing, so if you know the answer to that one, definitely let me know. But I will say the bottom bit will definitely be a play on Ben Hardaway. So as I mentioned, we see Beans, and in this one, he's voiced by Tommy Bond, who did the voice of Beans in a few shorts, although there's been a lot of inconsistency as to who's doing the voice of Beans in certain shorts. In some shorts, even sounds like a girl that voice artist expert Keith Scott is not actually aware of, and this information comes from the Wonderful Cartoon Voices book. So Beans consoles Porky, saying, "Don't worry, Porky, old boy," but Porky ends up being spooked by someone that's in the Hardaway bed. Now what's interesting is that Keith Scott has in, with the question mark, Mel Blanc as Sarcastic Doughboy. So could this be Mel Blanc's first appearance? Well, we don't know. And without proper documentation to confirm it, he's just having a guess here. So interesting that This may have been the first appearance of Mel Blanc in a Looney Tunes short, but we see that Porky's all freaked out and he ends up cowering underneath the table. And we see the fellow army buddies, and I'd say there's not much morale here because they all start singing "You're in the army now," and even the timing of that is pretty much off, although I do like the fact that they got a duck that's just randomly there. I don't know what army rank that duck would be, but in any case, we see a close-up of Porky under the table looking all scared, and that's actually a nice shot. I wonder who animated that, because that's actually a pretty solid drawing there. And then we see what everyone's wanting to see ever since Beans was introduced as a character. Beans eating beans. I mean, I don't know if that was put in there intentionally so people could laugh and go, haha, Beans is eating beans, but anyway. So we see a bird which appears to be a carrier pigeon. I do like the touch with the little helmet there, but, you know, it's just a generic bird, I suppose. But this bird, flying around, shot by a bullet, makes its way in, and ends up dying. No, really. The bird's just there. It just drops to the floor. They see the message, and you don't see this bird ever get up. So, yeah, if you want to see an on-screen death in Looney Tunes where the character doesn't get up and say, hey, it's just a cartoon, folks, well, this is one example. This bird right here. So they read the note that General Hardtack, is being held by enemy in old farmhouse, send help. You don't have to wonder how he got that message out or he got the bird. Look, I don't know, alright? I'm overthinking, I know. But for the purposes of a story, whatever, we got a note, so now we finally get a story here. And this is one of those scenes I mentioned before about why Beans is not really a great character, because Beans just says, gee willikers. Okay, sure. With so many characters looking and sounding like that, is it any wonder that people gravitated towards Porky as a character? I like that touch, though, of Porky as he sees the bird and as he's leaving, that his face is just full of beans. I'm assuming he's just sharing the same bowl of beans with Beans. Well, it wasn't particularly funny, but hey, look, it's a nice little detail at least. So they go on a motorcycle with a sidecar that's conveniently there and unscratched, which is outside the dispatch headquarters, which has definitely seen better days. And they ride along, and we see another sentient bullet. I don't know if it's the same bullet from before, but looks pretty angry anyways. So it goes up and starts attacking the boys on the actual motorbike. As they go through some trees and some scenery, the sidecar even splits apart, and they end up going over a fence and into the war zone itself. Next gag, yet another strange one. Porky and Beans end up hiding in different holes as the actual bullet tries to find them. Now, in a lot of shorts, there are obviously weird logic things, and when done right, they can be really funny, but here, it just doesn't work. You've got Porky and Beans in different holes, and they somehow end up in another hole, and they end up picking up that hole and end up using it to hide in to get away from these bullets? Very weird. Although I do wonder, did McKimson get inspired by this short when he made his short The Whole Idea? Probably not, but I would laugh if that was the case. So presumably the bullet no longer exists. It must have completely destroyed itself in that last attempt. So Porky and Beans find the old farmhouse, because that note was very descriptive earlier on. That's how we know that this is the old farmhouse and not some other old farmhouse, right? But we're looking in and we see the general and two bad guys, one of which is voiced by Billy Bletcher, who will do the odd bad guy voice here and there, not just at Warner Brothers, but pretty much all over. So who are these bad guys? Well, we'll never know, of course. And we see that they're going to torture this poor general. And which country is this general of? Who knows? Whatever. But we're going to see they're going to torture him, and what do? They do one of Jack King's famous, or infamous, close-up shots as we see a candle being lit up, and the flame is used to torture his feet, and that's pretty cruel. But honestly, what I think would have been funnier here is if he maybe light up a cigar or something, like you think he's going to do something bad with the fire, but he ends up pulling out a feather and just starts tickling him or something. I think that would have been funnier, but well, we get what we get with Jack King shorts. So Beans points out the obvious, that's General Thumbtack. Sure, I mean, I'm pretty sure we all gathered that. And because we know it's not part of the background, we see a signal rocket being picked up by Beans, tied around convenient barbed wire, which ends up shooting through and tying up our two villains, which, wow, that was pretty easy. There was not really much to it, and they end up rescuing the general by finding an airplane that's conveniently there, flying away, the plane gets hit, they end up crashing, and all three of them are in bed in the next shot, which I think that's amusing as it is because of how ridiculous it is. Why would the three patients be sharing one big bed? But okay, whatever. And we end up that the general gives a medal to Beans, but Beans decides to split it in half and share it with his friends Porky. Aw. That's nice of him to do that. And then they all start laughing, presumably as the morphine hits. The end. So this one is an improvement over the previous few Jack King shorts with Beans, which has Ham and X as side characters, but man, a lot of these gags are so poorly timed and so out of place, and it's so ridiculous. But at least there are some redeeming things here. I like the opening, and some of the gags are genuinely funny, some of which are, yes, unintentionally so, but whatever, it still made me laugh. But then you got a few things, like the guy shooting the machine gun and is shaking and all that stuff. No, a lot of these jokes definitely do not work. But in the end, it's okay, I guess. 5 out of 10, it's average. But you be the judge. You can watch it right now as it's in the public domain, so that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
Boy, I wish I'd stay on the farm.
Is Mama's little man afraid?
You're in the army now. You're not behind the plow. You'll never get rich. You're in the army now.
Come on, snap out of it.
Don't talk, eh? No, stop it! No, don't! Oh, stop it! Help!
That's General Hardtack.